in terms of sustainability, you can look at it two ways in two different aspects, and I'm going to concentrate on the latter. A lot of folks are talking about sustainability in building data centers, right? Greener technologies, reusable materials, things like that. What we focus on at AmeriCase is more of sustainability in the operation side. And to be honest with you, we're not doing a very good job. We're not doing a very good job being sustainable because we're so hyper-focused in the hyperscale mega growth aspect of data centers that we're not taking a step back and saying, how can we do this better? How can we do this with less carbon and things like that? Now, we have the bigger companies, the Microsofts and the hyperscalers, as we like to call it, the Fab 7, Microsoft, AWS, Oracle, Google, Meta, companies like that, that do have that ability and the bandwidth to start looking at the sustainability in operations. They have started to look at that and starting to invest money in that, and which is great, from reducing our carbon footprint to reusable packaging to a lot of things. Unfortunately, in the second tier market, which I call the colo operators, who heavily depend on their tenants, i.e. those same hyperscalers I just mentioned, as their tenants to lead the sustainability charge in operations, that segment needs to do a better job in sustainability. Right now, it is simply a marketing word being utilized because at the end of the day, if it impacts their bottom dollar, they steer away from it. So I think we just need to make a renewed effort into sustainability and commit to it. It's a pretty hard question just to answer right off the top of the bat, because again, at the speed that we're moving, again, we're all talking about AI and machine learning, and we're kind of at that pivotal stage where we're moving from AI adoption to AI inference at this point. So because of the speed that we're moving and the technology is constantly changing, just trying to figure out sustainability in one aspect is tough, and how to standardize that, right? So I'll give you a good example. If we're trying to use some reusable packaging for a piece of component, that component becomes obsolete within 16 months. So the thinking process today, unfortunately, is like, okay, so why do we even have to worry about sustainable packaging? This thing's going to change in 16 months. There's no point in talking about it. When we should be thinking about, okay, this is going to change in the next 16 months. What's the next, let's call it a motherboard. What's the next motherboard after 16 months? What's the motherboard after that, the third generation? How do we build sustainable packaging for all three generations? That's the conversation we should be having, and we're not doing that today. So how do we take a look at the entire supply chain? I mean, again, same example that I used before when we were talking about motherboards. But, for example, let's take a look at racks, right? These are the server racks. Understanding that when a server rack gets built, just the outside shape and size of a server rack gets built, they're using cardboard boxes, or they're using a wooden crate to move it from the manufacturer of the rack to the integrator. The integrator is the organization that puts the servers into racks, and they may be putting it into a different wooden crate, and that gets shipped over to the data centers, and then ideally, that empty crate goes back to the rack manufacturer, but more often than not, because it's made out of wood or there's some damages occurred, it's usually thrown out into the landfill. But we need to be looking at it from a supply chain perspective, from sustainability, is like, how do we attack this from the OEM all the way to the end user, and then how do we utilize that to end of life, which is the recycler. So one good aspect of this is rack packaging, for example. Seeing a lot of great concepts on this one, right? So rack packaging kind of follows the rack through its entirety, right? From cradle, which is when the rack gets built, to the next point, which is the integrator, where servers get put in. That same packaging is used over and over again, all the way to end of life, where the rack is being decommissioned and sent to the recycler. Of course, it's not the same rack, but a similar rack that's on the decommissioning life cycle. You put it in the same packaging, and then you ship it over to the recycler. Recycler takes out that rack and sends that empty crate back to the OEM. So that would be kind of a good example, a very simplistic example, but a good example of that, looking at the entire supply chain holistically. First of all, reusable packaging can, over a period of time, can save a significant amount from OEM packaging. There's a product that we do for battery backup units, BB units, right? The before we came into the play, the OEM was spending about $92 per pallet to ship batteries from their facility to the data center. Again, reusable packaging is more expensive, but if you take this in terms of organic food, right? About 6-7 years ago, we talked about organic food, and I'm the first one to go to my wife and say, why are we spending so much money more on chicken? But in the long term, what are we looking at? We're looking at a reduction in our overall better health, right? So now I don't have all the gastric issues. I don't have indigestion. I don't have all these other possibly cancerous material that were in the non-organic food. So we got to look long term. And yes, there is a financial recovery. The return on investment is there, but it sometimes detracts people because that return on investments is measured in months, sometimes in years. But I think we need to be looking at this in terms of months and years, and not just like, what am I saving today, right? Environmentally, yes, absolutely. Reusable packaging is just the way it is. You're using the same packaging over and over again, reducing your carbon footprint, more importantly, reducing your landfill waste. But even take it a step further and take a look at using recycled material in reusable packaging. If we used recycled material, for example, in our battery backup unit packaging, for example, we reduce the carbon footprint by about 87%. Why? Because a majority of that carbon emissions is from producing aluminum. So if we take that out of the equation, again, we've reduced it by 87%. We're reusing it over and over again for 7-10 years. So you're going to save that $92, like I mentioned before, over and over again. The return on investment then becomes very, very negligible. It's measured in weeks and months and not months and years. So again, it all depends on moving away from looking at short-term gains on your bottom line for that month or that quarter to looking at what will be better for us in the long run in months and years.